right, how we feeling on a Wednesday? A hump day, if we want to go with the old cliche. Welcome in to In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com. I'm feeling good in the middle of the week. I'm excited to be here. Hope you're excited to be here as well. Glad to have you on board. If you ever want to contribute to the show, I don't feel like I say this enough, call the show, 502-830-9195. We don't do live phone calls, of course, but you can leave a voicemail and maybe once in a while we'll play you on the show. Or you can contribute on the YouTube comments section, which we will actually get to it, here momentarily, because one of the first things we are going to get into is something that's been very topical and more so than I kind of anticipated it being early on. But it's the subject of fans leaving at halftime when it comes to Indiana football. I put out a clip yesterday from our Monday show, my conversation with Mitchell Page, talking about fans that leave at halftime and how that's kind of an issue when it comes to kind of the overall Indiana football culture as a whole. And then there's been tons of interaction, not necessarily tons with me specifically, but just anytime somebody makes a post about fans leaving and what kind of a problem it is, it just seems to get a lot of reaction, whether it be positive, negative. I mean, all sides of the coin are kind of shown here. And it's an interesting situation that we find Indiana football in, because never this early on in a tenure, obviously it's just begun, have we ever seen this kind of a cry for extra support, I feel like. And maybe it's because we're so desperate to kind of keep up with the times, if you will. Because Indiana football doesn't want to, you don't want to get left behind in this new era of college football. So we'll get into that. Don't want to jump in too quickly. I also had a conversation with our man Dylan Sinn from the Fort Wayne Journal Gazette, kind of talking about really all of the teams around the state of Indiana, the college football teams, I should say. Talked a lot of IU, talked Purdue and Notre Dame as well. And Purdue and Notre Dame will be facing off against one another, not this weekend, but in week 3, after Purdue goes through their first of 2 bye weeks of the season coming up this Saturday. Excuse me as I take an early cough there. I tell you what, we are entering into the midst of fall allergy season here coming up. I'm starting to notice the early signs of fall allergies kind of rearing their head, or showing their face, I should say, as we enter into the month of September. And although I do love the fall weather that I've talked about fairly frequently, I am not a fan of allergies in any way, shape, or form. And allergies in my neck of the woods, in the Louisville/Kentuckiana area, I've read things that say that where I live specifically is one of the worst areas in the entire world for seasonal allergies. And I feel like the worst of my allergies happen during the transition from spring to summer. And not necessarily, most people, I feel like it hits them from winter to spring. For me, I think it's spring to summer. I don't know what it is. I tend to feel more sick during the summer months than I do any other time of year. And I'm not talking on a daily or regular basis, but I've noticed the last couple of times where I've had days where I don't feel very good, it typically comes in the summer months. And again, maybe that's normal for most people and I just don't realize it, but I do feel like more people tend to get sick in, the late fall into the winter, that type of stuff. So depends on who you are, but nonetheless, not a fan of allergies. I think I'm feeling okay right now. Thankfully, as our friend Jeffrey the Greek put it, the pipes are working pretty fine today. Hopefully we don't have many moments this year where the pipes aren't working, because that would be an issue, wouldn't it? But one thing you'll probably see me do, and hopefully it doesn't bother any of you, but I'm going to continue to take breaks to not break like stop the show, but you may see me open the water bottle from time to time just to kind of clear up the potential nastiness that may be sitting inside the throat. Because when you're hosting a show for around an hour or so, you don't want to deal with the wear and tear. You want to keep things fresh as much as possible. So welcome in once again to In Touch with Indiana Sports. Glad to have you with me, and we'll take you up until we get close to 60 minutes here per usual. And I'm excited for another week of Indiana football. I'm excited for a Friday night edition of Indiana football this week. I know a lot of people aren't fans of the Friday night games, and I totally get it. If you're somebody who loves high school football, you love going to your local high school's Friday night football games, or maybe you've got a son or daughter even who may be participating in Friday night events, whether it be the football team itself or cheerleaders. Maybe you're a regular at those events. And I get it if you hate Friday night football for that reason. I've never really been a part of that scene. Even when I was in high school, I was never a fan of going to high school football games. And I don't know what it was. It just wasn't really my vibe. I went to a few whenever I was a freshman, because whenever you're a freshman in high school, you want to experience, part of, being in high school. And then a lot of that is going to football games. And I think for me, I mean, it was obviously a couple of different things, driving factors, if you will. But our football team, first of all, was not very good during any of the years when I was in high school. They're actually really good now. They won their first ever state title a couple of years ago. But back when I was in high school, by the way, it's Bullitt East High School in Mount Washington, Kentucky. Just so you're all not wondering, what the heck is he talking about? He hasn't even said the high school that he went to. But back when I was in high school, it just wasn't really my scene. I wasn't as outgoing. When you're a freshman too, by the way, I'm sure some of you can relate to this and remember back whenever, you were in high school. When you're a freshman, it can be very awkward, just kind of getting used to everything. You're still kind of, I mean, I don't even know if kind of is the right way to say it, but you're still going through puberty, really. And it can just be a very uncomfortable time. And, especially if you aren't super outgoing. And one thing I've learned about my personality over the years is that, so I believe I have an extroverted personality within me. And that's why I think that's partially why I enjoy doing this type of thing for a living. But I've noticed over the years, I kind of revert back to the introverted side of me more often than I used to. I feel like during my college years specifically, I really popped out of my shell, if you will, and really kind of, I don't want to say became a different person, but maybe became a more fully realized version of myself. But then COVID hit, and all of a sudden, I went back to kind of, I don't say, what's the word, receding, just, I don't know, reverting back to being more an introvert. And I think that's stayed with me ever since. And not that I love hanging out with friends. I love going out and doing stuff, but I've learned, I have a newfound appreciation for, just kind of doing things on my own from time to time. I find solace in the I don't want to say the loneliness, because that kind of sounds sad, but solace in, I guess, being with myself on occasion. So anyway, I went off onto a tangent that I didn't expect to just then. So we'll try to get this thing back on the rails. And we were talking about Friday night football. Now Indiana's playing on a Friday night this week. And I don't know. I believe it's their only Friday night game of the season. I do believe the Big Ten, when they are putting out schedules and, finding TV, not TV rights, but, finding TV time for certain teams, I do believe they try to give every team no more than a game on Friday nights, because obviously it is a big recruiting night for the college coaches as well. So good thing for Indiana football. They typically get their Friday night game out of the way. And I feel like historically it has been, at least in the last few years, it has been on the second week of the season. And it's usually against an FCS opponent, as it will be this week when they face Western Illinois. So, and I do think there's also an advantage when you think about the following week. You're traveling all the way to Los Angeles for week 3 to face UCLA. You're already getting your game out of the way. So you already have that extra day to kind of rest and get rejuvenated before you travel out to the West Coast. So I think it really plays in Indiana's favor to have this Friday night game and have it placed where it is on the schedule. So I think there's some good takeaways whenever we think about it from that perspective. So looking forward to it. Kyler Staley and I believe, will both be doing the HoosierIllustrated.com post-game wrap-up show once again. And again, I'll throw that number out there. If you want to react to anything you see on, during the broadcast or during the game, feel free to leave us a message. 502-830-9195 is the number, and we will play it on the show. I'll play it on this show, depending on what the question is. And that's also the hotline we use for my other podcast, Out of Touch. So, hit that hotline up whenever you please. And you don't have to hit it up. It's just an option that I like to use from time to time. So that is that. Back to the fans in the stands comments that we were talking about earlier. I want to get into a few YouTube comments that were placed on the video that I posted yesterday, Mitchell Page on Indiana football fans leaving at halftime. And by the way, if you missed that, if you missed any of Monday's show, or you didn't happen to catch the clip from that show that I posted on Tuesday, you can find all of that and much more at the same place you're watching this show right now. And that is the Hoosier Illustrated YouTube page. And if you want to be notified of any time that something goes live or is posted, all you got to do is hit that subscribe button. It doesn't take any time. It doesn't require you to sign up, any of that nonsense. All you got to do is hit the button. And if you want to be fully notified, like when a video is posted or when we're live for a post-game wrap-up show, hit that notifications bell and you'll know exactly when something brand new is on your YouTube feed. So there you go. But with that being said, I want to read a couple of these comments reacting to just kind of the overall fan, I don't want to say experience, but the way fans have been reacting and fans have been going about their business when it comes to being at the games from in Memorial Stadium for Indiana football. And so I do want to go through a couple of these. Here's one from Monroe County IU fan. He says, lighten up. Fans are fans. No reason to beat them down. They will stay at games when IU starts winning solidly. Until then, just take a breath. Well, Monroe County IU fan, I don't know whether that's directed at me or Mitchell or both of us or whatever. It doesn't really matter. But I don't think we were beating down fans. I just think, especially whenever I think about it from Mitchell's perspective, he's coming from the viewpoint of being a former football player in the IU program specifically. And I remember he mentioned multiple times how there were several games where he'd come out after halftime and how demoralizing it can be to see 40 to 50% of your crowd gone after halftime. And that's just not a very common thing. And I get it. Indiana football is one of the worst power programs historically in all of college football. I totally understand that. But what I don't understand is why we have to hold that standard, the former standard, against what's going on currently. And that goes for any program. I don't understand why the past has to be what we use everything as, kind of like the former standard, like the scale for everything, if that makes sense. Everybody keeps saying, oh, all they've got to do is win and they'll stay. And I don't really understand that argument, because here's my thing. They were winning the game on Saturday comfortably. The first half, other than that final drive where FIU scored the touchdown, that was as good of a half as you could have expected from Indiana football. And if you're not thinking about what happened with the Tom Allen regime or any regime prior, and you're just taking the product for what it is currently on the field, I don't get why what your reason to leave the game at halftime truly is. Now, I get it. Everybody can do whatever they want. And that gets into another comment that I want to bring up, and I fully agree with this. Larry says fans can do whatever they want. They paid their money. Don't tell them what to do. And I get it. Fans can do whatever they want. If you like leaving at halftime, and no matter what happens on the field, then that's your choice. You do whatever you want. I get that, Larry. But what I think is annoying to certain parts of the fan base, especially to those who do stick around, is the sector of fans who like to complain when things are going wrong and that there's a culture issue. And if you're going to be a part of that group and you're also going to leave when things are going well, like when Indiana's winning at halftime this past weekend, I think that's what people are genuinely complaining about. If people have other things, better things to do with their lives, and they just want to leave at halftime, that's one thing. I just don't understand. And maybe these are two totally separate people. Maybe the fans leaving are not the ones who are doing the complaining about the culture and that type of stuff. Maybe this will just always be what Indiana football is. And if that's the case, that's unfortunately just a sad reality, I guess. But I have good reason to believe that a lot of these people are just using the past as an excuse. Well, you know what? I'm going to go home and we can watch listen to Don Fisher on the radio, and I'll stay for the whole game whenever they play Maryland in week 4 if they're undefeated. It's a conditional relationship with Indiana football, and people want to just put all their energies toward Indiana basketball. So again, that's kind of a generalization. I don't mean to take it down that path necessarily, but that's just kind of my viewpoint with all of this. Let me go ahead and read another comment. This is from DCOLOIS, DCLOC, something like that. Excuse me if I'm saying your name wrong when you're watching this. But he or she said, I said it before, invest in stay bonuses, scam people out, and give extra priority points for those that stay. That's a good point. Students as well, in the pass out now. As someone who is a newer season ticket holder who wanted to pay more to improve my seats, it's frustrating when I look down from section 108 and see all those empty seats. Yeah, there needs to be an extra incentive to stay. And I think they've done things like that in the past where they, he mentions the priority points. I don't know if they're still doing that this year or if they've ever done it, but I know they've done something along those lines. And I do think they normally do those types of bonuses for like non-revenue sports, like go to the Indiana men's soccer game or go to the baseball game, the softball game, whatever it may be. So they do need, I do think the administration overall has taken great strides in improving the game day experience, but they've got to get a lockdown on a way to make people want to stay in the stands. And again, maybe all it comes down to is just win consistently. And I know that's kind of frustrating, especially to Mitchell. And to an extent, it's frustrating for me as well, because in my opinion, if the team's winning and you're currently there at that specific game, I don't see a reason to leave at halftime at all. If your reason is, I want a better product on the field. Because if you're seeing a good product and they're winning like they were on Saturday and put in a dominant performance, then that argument becomes invalid to me. So people can say whatever they want. I get it. Everyone has their own opinion, and that's totally fine. But I just don't get the whole win and we'll stay type of thing, because that's exactly what they did on Saturday. They win and they won and the game was never in question. Are we going to see the same thing on Friday? I don't know. Mitchell's going to be there. And I don't know if Mitchell, I'm sure if you see a mass exodus at halftime, and again, 30 to 40%, 50% of the fans are gone, I know you'll hear from Mitchell, and you'll probably hear from some other people about like what's going on here. And again, I will go back and say this. It is your choice. If you want to leave, I'm not trying to tell you to stay if you don't want to. I just don't get why people complain and complain about the culture and then don't contribute to improving the culture. You know what I mean? I think that's kind of my ultimate issue with all of this. So we'll see. I'm going to read one more comment and then we'll move on from this for now. But this has been a major talking point really throughout the fan base all this week so far. And it probably will still be a major talking point until things change. So Tim Russell says this: I watched the Notre Dame game talk about a 12-man Texas A&M. What a crowd it was. Amazing. And they helped their team. You could see it. Notre Dame won, but had times of trouble because of the fans. It helps your team stay in the stands. Fill the stands. And yeah, that's true. And Mitchell made another point also on Monday about Oregon. They were facing an FCS level Idaho team, and they had them on the ropes. We've seen Indiana in the past, like last year when Akron came to town and took Indiana to overtime, and that place, was supposed to be the ghost out or whatever. They had the black uniforms that night, and I will say I do like the black uniforms. By the way, I don't know if they'll bring those back. Maybe not, considering in their first game they used them, they didn't really turn out. The result was nearly a disaster. I guess it was technically a disaster, even though you got the win, but nonetheless. It just looked, whenever the atmosphere is not what it's supposed to be, when the fans are gone, it gives that other team motivation, like, oh, we can do this. These fans don't really care about their team, and it gives them that extra push. And I think that's kind of, what Tim and Mitchell, really all of us have been talking about when it comes to the importance of atmosphere and culture and that type of stuff. So we'll keep an eye on it. We'll keep reacting to it. And again, I appreciate all your comments on the videos and replying to stuff on Twitter as well. And I'll say this too. I appreciate everybody so far being respectful, because I believe that on social media and YouTube and all that stuff, we can all be civil and have disagreements without getting personal and saying things that are intended to be hurtful and that type of thing. So I appreciate all those who have sent in comments and not said nasty and ugly stuff, because I'm not going to stick to that level. I hope you won't as well. There are some people who do it for fun, like they really just go down a path and they're trying to troll people. I don't typically do that. It's just not in my nature. So again, I appreciate those that I can have a disagreed opinion with and be able to, go back and forth like this. So it just makes fun content like we're doing right now. So we'll talk more about this. Probably not this week. We'll just put it to bed for now, unless there's, something crazy that gets said about it from somebody else that we need to react to. But I'm sure we'll revisit this conversation again next week whenever Mitchell comes on to talk more about what he saw on Friday. And we'll just have to we'll wait and see. We'll put this to bed now, or for now and then. You're actually going to hear it in a moment when I bring in our man Dylan Sinn. We don't talk about it very much during that, but we do briefly kind of mention it during our 20 minutes or so conversation. So I guess we'll go ahead and bring in our man Dylan Sinn. Without further ado, here he is, the man, the myth, the legend from Fort Wayne, Mr. Dylan Sinn. Joining me now from the Fort Wayne Journal Gazette is none other than the one, the only Dylan Sinn. Happy Wednesday, my friend.
Thank you, John. Thank you for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
I'm glad to have you back. Sorry I had to cancel on you a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, we've talked about this already, but my dog being a little sick and having to cancel the show in general. But I'm glad to have you back today. We're now a week into college football. We have results from each of the local teams and already a lot of chaos and nonsense going on in the college football world.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a college football week one, which means that there was a lot that happened that we didn't expect. Some stuff that happened that we did expect. There was a lot of blowouts in the top 10, but we'll get those teams playing each other as the season goes on. It's going to be a lot of fun.
We will, including the Boilermakers and the Fighting Irish, who will compete not this coming week, but the following week. Purdue has a bye this week, correct?
They do. It's a very early bye week. So they go right from playing Indiana State, who went 1-10 in FCS last year, to playing a top 10 team next week. So it is a pretty significant step up in competition. We'll see how they handle that. But they have 2 weeks to not only get ready for that game, but to get healthy. They had some guys out against Indiana State. They expect to play against Notre Dame. So that's something that they're looking forward to.
In the early bye week is strange, but I do, for those who are unaware, every team now does get 2 bye weeks in the college football season. So if your team does have an early bye week, it doesn't mean that they have to play 10 straight games or whatever it may be to finish the season. There will be a second bye week sandwiched somewhere else throughout their schedule. But let's go ahead and start with the Hoosiers, since this is primarily an IU show. We do talk about other things here and there, but we'll start with the Hoosiers, kicking off the Kurt Cignetti era with a 31-7 victory, a dominant win that I don't want to say people weren't expecting, but I think one thing that people probably were a little surprised about is how kind of polished this team looked for somebody for a team that has a brand new head coach, a whole lot of new personnel, and to come out and have the dominant style of win that you did. There were some hiccups here and there, obviously, but to really take care of business and never have this game in doubt, it's definitely a different look than what we were kind of used to in the last couple of years of the Tom Allen era.
Yeah, I was looking this up earlier. I thought it was interesting. They won by 24. They won 31-7. They had not won an FBS game by 24 points since 2020. So no time in the last 3 years did they win it, except for games against FCS opponents. No time in the last 3 years did they win a game by this margin. Remember, they beat Western Kentucky by 2. They beat Western Kentucky by 3. They beat Akron by 2. So it's an easy breezy win against a team that is in the same level as the Hoosiers, which is not something that has happened recently. Even remember in 2022, they were down 10-0 at halftime against Idaho. So, I know that I've heard some people say that, well, it wasn't quite as dominant as they thought, quite frankly. There were some people who thought that IU would do better after all the offseason talk. And for that, I think that, first of all, Florida International is a better team than like the name Florida International says. They are an FBS team. They're going to win some games this year. They have some talent on that roster. That quarterback is pretty good. And IU made him look very ineffective, which I thought was very, very impressive for Indiana. And then a lot of the reason the game wasn't more of a blowout was because Indiana was hurting itself. And I think those are correctable mistakes. The penalties on offense, I think, is something that is going to be a significant area of focus here over the next into the UCLA game, because those are drive killers. There were some times where IU was driving and they got a penalty, didn't go down and score, right? They should have had another touchdown. They had the trick play that was, boy, was that trick play set up perfectly.
Yes.
It worked perfectly. Running back just didn't make the throw. Tyson Lawton was so upset about that after the game.
And he had a fantastic game otherwise.
Yes.
And we can dive into the running game in a minute, but one thing that
Absolutely.
really, I think, was shocking just compared to what we've been used to is the fact that the offensive line and the run game in general was the dominant part of the offense. And it's something, I mean, really the offense has been a problem overall in the last couple of years, but to see the run game kind of be the focal point was something that I think was really impressive from Indiana's part.
Yeah, especially with an offensive line that's still gelling, right? Like there's still strides to be made on this offensive line with a couple of new starters, with guys that have come in that didn't play here before. And so, yeah, the running backs were very good. I like Tyson Lawton a lot. I like Justice Ellison a lot. Kalen Black was hurt a little bit. So their third running back, who I think will get carries this year, was kind of banged up. They held him out for precautionary reasons. So really effective game by the run game, which I thought was really nice to see. I love the way Lawton especially runs. His pad level is so low. He is so hard to tackle. It's really fun to watch. And then, yeah, he had kind of an endearing response to biffing that throw. The guy was so open. He said after the game, he's like, I threw it perfectly every single time in practice. He said we repped that play so many times, and his excuse was he had wiped his hands on his towel before the play, but the towel was wet, so it made his gloves wet, and the ball slipped out of his hand. And he said his teammates were laughing at him when he got back to the sideline. He said, I wasn't laughing. It was not funny. I should have made the throw, which is what you want to hear from the guy, right? It is
what you want to hear. It's
a mistake.
It's the Kurt Signetti mindset of
exactly.
perfection.
You could have done better. So no, 250 rushing yards in that area. Really, really impressive. I think hopefully a preview of what we can see going forward, because if the run game can hold its end of the bargain, boy howdy, this offense is going to be good, because those receivers are really good, right? We didn't see EJ Williams in this game. We didn't see Donovan McCulley very much in this game, and the offense still moved the ball. I thought that was a really good sign.
And another thing too, I don't think you'll see much of Donovan McCulley this weekend as well, just because when you have kind of a minor injury the way that he did, you don't really want to risk it in a game where you more than likely aren't going to need somebody like Donovan McCulley. Instead, you want to get him rested and feeling 100% by the time you travel to Los Angeles in week 3 for an important Big Ten game that really, I don't want to say it's going to decide your season, because that's a little premature to say something like that. But as we've talked time and time again, at least I've mentioned on this show, that third game against UCLA is a really big pivotal moment in Kurt Signetti's first year, to where if you win that game, the door is wide open for the possibilities of what type of season and record you could have, and kind of create a new level of expectations for this program moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're going on the road. It's an iconic venue at UCLA. I think that it obviously opens the way, as you said, to a 4-0 start at minimum, and then you would get a home game against Maryland, who's also probably going to be 4-0. Would be a huge nationally recognized game that is going to have a lot of eyeballs on it. And so, yeah, it's the Big Ten debut for Kurt Signetti. It's IU's first game against a team from the new Big Ten, right? One of the expansion teams. So it is a team that struggled in week 1 against Hawaii. I think Hawaii is better than people think. I don't think that is necessarily proof that UCLA is going to be terrible this year, but I do think that they struggled in that game, that IU should be able to play with these guys. I don't think UCLA is some world beater just because they came from the Pac-12. So it is a very, very important game. You win that game. I do think that some of the issues that IU had with the fans, we talked about, Kurt Signetti talked about it after the game, we need the fans to stick around. I think that some of the issues with the fans will start to go away if you win that game on the road. Go do something unexpected, right? And I don't think it's unexpected inside the program that they expect to win that game. But outside the program, IU beating UCLA on the road in the Rose Bowl is not something people expect, right? Go do something unexpected. Interest is going. Then you will see what Kurt Signetti said in the offseason, with the interest really flowing into the team. You'll start to see that happen. And I think that is a, as you said, huge, huge moment in IU season.
And the one last thing I'll say, because we've talked a lot about the fan stuff over the past couple of days, I don't think the issue is getting people into the stands, because
No,
that
it's not.
stadium was nearly full for
Yeah,
the beginning first 2 quarters
it
of the
was a good
game.
crowd.
The issue is
But,
people
yeah,
leaving at
yeah,
halftime, which
yeah. Which is
I,
part of the culture. Just it's how it works at IU. I'm an
yeah,
IU alum. I was there. I'm a huge football fan, so I can usually leave at halftime. I wanted to see the game. A lot of my friends left at halftime. Like I would be sitting there with we came in with a group of 8 people, only 3 people stayed, right? And
yeah.
so it's just kind of how it works at IU. And if they start winning, that will probably change. There were good crowds in 19 when they were really good. By the end of the season, there were good crowds in that stadium. In 21, when they were ranked in the preseason, that Cincinnati game in week 3, the first home game against a good team, it was huge. Like that crowd was
Yeah.
into that game and propelled them to that early lead before they kind of gave it away.
Someone
So
saying that the students went and flipped a Cincinnati. I'll never forget that. You remember the video of the students who went and flipped a Cincinnati tailgate table after that game? It was
yeah, like it
horrible, but
was
like that was
yeah, like man, it was what like there is a fan base here for IU football if they are good. It's just a question of being good first,
yeah.
and that's why it's always been hard, right? The fans aren't going to show up unless you're good, but it's hard to get good unless you have fans show up, right? And IU maybe has found a little bit of a back door into being good without the fans showing up first. They went and got a coach who brought a lot of his team with him, so you don't have to kind of convince a lot of these guys, hey, come play for this school that the fans leave at halftime, So I
Yeah.
think that is part of it. If there are some good environments late in the season, if IU wins a bunch of games this year, I think you'll hear that narrative much more next offseason. Obviously, a big if. Got to get it done on the field first.
Let's pivot over to West Lafayette, and I want to hear your thoughts on Purdue's opening week victory against Indiana State. Obviously, an FCS opponent. Nothing super, the competition wasn't super great, but Hudson Card did tie a record, 24 of 25 completions. I believe that was with a Georgia quarterback or something in 2018 was the record that he tied with. So impressive nonetheless, no matter who the opponent is. It's just a matter of will that translate going forward, especially when you have potentially a playoff Notre Dame team that you're facing in week 3.
Yeah, so my prior on this, I'm higher on Purdue than people were in the offseason. I thought they were going to be a better team than people thought. I know that IU has had a lot of the hype this season. I don't think the gap between IU and Purdue is that big. I think Purdue is also a 6-6 football team with a similar. If they played the same schedule as IU, they would have a relatively similar record, I think. But the problem is that Purdue plays a much, much, much more difficult schedule. So I think at the end of the season, IU's record will probably be better. Even though I think that game, the bucket game this year is going to be fun. I think it's going to be a competitive game. So that's my prior on this. I was not really surprised that Purdue did what they did against Indiana State, which is not just an FCS team, but a bad FCS team. They went 1-10 last year. This is not like playing Idaho or playing North Dakota State or something like
one
that.
of those guys.
This is a bad FCS team. So it wasn't surprising they did what they did, but you can only play the team in front of you, and they looked as good as you can look against that team. There wasn't a whole lot of the stuff that Indiana had where there's penalties and things that kill drives. They had at least one turnover that kind of hurt them. But other than that, really, really efficient. They moved the ball on the ground and through the air. I think the thing people were looking for with Purdue was explosiveness in the passing game, because Deion Burke's leaving for Oklahoma was a punch in the gut for them, right? He was their most explosive player last year on offense. And so could you replace him? I think they've done a pretty good job of replacing him with Jamal Edrin, who came in last year, tore his ACL, missed the season. I think they like him a lot. Leland Smith, the junior college transfer, made a nice catch deep downfield. I think that he could be a player for them, which was not something they were expecting. And then Max Clare, the tight end, he kind of has the look to me of the next great Purdue tight end, kind of in a Payne Durham mold. So he's a true sophomore, or maybe a redshirt sophomore. I can't remember, a redshirt freshman. I can't remember because he got hurt last year. I think he played 5 games, so probably a sophomore. But he's a good player. And so Hudson Card has weapons. He has an offensive line that can protect him. The defense was flying around. It's as good as it gets for a game against a bad FCS opponent. You don't know how that's going to translate until you play Notre Dame. I tend to think that game is going to be closer than people think. I think it's a game at least into the third quarter, if not before.
What do you see happening if Purdue were to pull off an upset against the Fighting Irish?
Boy, I mean, that kind of, it changes how you look at Ryan Walters' tenure, right? I think so far people have been kind of looking for where are the steps forward, right? I think it was possible if you squinted to see some at the end of last season. They started 2-7, won 2 of their last 3 games, figured out a way on the fly to move the ball when Hudson Card was clearly not playing at 100%. He was hurt a lot of last season. And so they let I don't know how many people have kind of internalized this. Purdue led the Big Ten in rushing in conference games last year with an air raid offensive coordinator. Yeah, they averaged 186 yards per game in Big Ten play last year on the ground. Really, really weird. I don't know where that came from. But with an air raid offensive coordinator. So they found an offensive identity on the fly at the end of last season, which I thought was pretty impressive. But obviously, after winning 17 games at the end of the Jeff Brom era, the last 2 seasons, you win 4 last year. It seems like you're probably on the way to 4 or 5 this year because of the way the schedule sets up, even though I think the roster is better than it was last year. Beating the Fighting Irish, you would reevaluate where Ryan Walters is going. I think there are questions right now about, can he elevate this program to where Jeff Brom had it? Is it even possible to get it to where Jeff Brom had it with Purdue not in the Big Ten West anymore and having to play much tougher teams on an annual basis? So I think
that interesting because early on, Purdue does have a Big Ten West style of schedule, but then you get into the latter half and it turns very Big Ten East like really quickly.
And you have Oregon in there, and it's just tough. And so I think that beating Notre Dame would be a feather in your cap and also would give you a path to bowl eligibility. I don't know if there are many paths for Purdue to bowl eligibility right now without winning one of those 4 big games. You play Ohio State, you play Penn State, you play Oregon, you play Notre Dame. I think they have to win one of those 4 to get to a bowl game. Beating Notre Dame opens up that path, which would be a huge step forward in year 2 for Ryan Walters.
And speaking of Notre Dame, they had probably the best win of the weekend, one of the best wins of the weekend, of course. There's a few good ones. USC got to go on over LSU as well. But Notre Dame really kind of, I don't want to say getting the monkey off their back, but with all of the doubts that people may have had with Marcus Freeman, getting that win at Texas A&M is without a doubt the perfect way to start if you're a Notre Dame fan or, on the team as well. What do you see them, or how do you see them moving forward? Obviously, there's a path for them to be a playoff team, of course. But what did you like about their performance against the Aggies?
Yeah, I liked the offensive line. It wasn't perfect. I don't think it was going to be perfect. But the question going into the season was, you have 3 new starters on the line who have never started a game before, right? Can this line be anywhere close to the standard that Notre Dame has set in recent years, where they've had a top 10, 15 offensive line basically every year other than 2021 since 2017? They have been really, really good up front. And could you get anywhere close to that standard? I think they will this year. I don't know if it's going to be a top 15 line, maybe a top 20, 25, which I think will be good enough because they've upgraded the receiver position. They have a good quarterback, and they have good tight ends. And so I think that the offense should be fine if the offensive line can just be good. It doesn't have to be great, just good or even competent. I think it was against Texas A&M, especially late, opened up some holes in the run game late in that game. And Notre Dame, quite frankly, what really impressed me was the more conditioned team in that game. They looked like they were fresher at the end of the game playing in that Texas heat than Texas A&M did, which I thought was really impressive. They all game long, Texas A&M players, it was maybe once a series, were going down with cramps, would have to miss a couple plays here and there. Notre Dame had 1 injury in that game, and it was because a guy got rolled up on a tackle. It was not like a conditioning injury in any way, shape, or form. So that was really impressive to me. And then the defense was as good as advertised. So I like what Notre Dame showed. I think there are steps to go on offense. They don't have a huge test unless you think Purdue is a huge test, which I think it might well be. I think Purdue might be pretty good. So let's go on the road and win a game against Purdue. Let's beat Northern Illinois this weekend. Let's kind of continue this path that you're on. I think that is, how do you follow this up? In 2021, when Notre Dame beat Florida State in week 1, it was a big win. Everyone was excited about it. They won on the road in a big nationally televised game. They came home and played a MAC opponent in Toledo and almost lost that game. So how do you follow that up, I think, is the big question.
And what's crazy, I'm looking at Notre Dame's schedule. They don't have a super difficult slate of games. Now, they play some teams there in the top 25. Obviously, Louisville beat them last year. They will get them at home this year. But you don't have a true road game against a difficult opponent, or at least a ranked opponent, until the very end of the season when they play USC. So it is a very manageable schedule for them. And I want to ask you this, Dylan. You may or may not know the answer to it. But because Notre Dame has no conference affiliation, they can't get one of the automatic top 4 seeds for the college football playoff, correct?
That is correct. Basically, what the calculation that Notre Dame made, because they were in the room when this was being decided. Like, their athletic director is part of the committee that makes the decision on how the playoff is structured. So basically, what they decided was, we don't have to play a conference championship game, so we don't mind playing the extra game in the playoff. Essentially, that was kind of the compromise they made. So, in order to retain their independence, they were like, we get to stay without a conference championship game, and we'll have to play an extra game in the playoff, even if we're ranked in the top 4. That's fine with us. We're going to go with that. I think when the bracket system came out, how it's going to work came out, people were like, oh, Notre Dame got screwed. The committee's finally taking it to them. They're going to have to join a conference. No, that's not how that's going to work. They knew this was coming. They were part of the planning process. They don't care. They are excited because, at least in part, that it makes it more likely they get a home game in the playoff.
Yeah.
So if they're ranked anywhere between 1st and 8th, they get a home game, because they would be
that is crazy though. The fact that they could, let's just say they are definitively the best team in the country.
They would get the 5th seed.
They still get the 5, and that's just weird to think about. But I mean, if that's what they want to compromise to keep their independence, I guess then so be it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. They made that. There was a calculation they made. They went into it with eyes wide open and said, bring us home playoff games.
Last thing I want to ask you about before we wrap this thing up. The Florida State fan on Twitter, Dylan, who claimed he was going to get a red Solo cup, get a spoon, and eat dog poop out of it if his team lost to Boston College, which they did, has seemingly disappeared from the internet. What do you have to think about all of this?
I think usually having Florida State beating Boston College is a pretty good bet, but like I would have made sure that someone gave me at least some odds, that's tough, man. Like they didn't look very good against Georgia Tech. You had to at least have some kind of a hedge on there, but my goodness, I guess I would disappear too.
My theory is, and this may be kind of outlandish, but I don't think it's too far-fetched when you think about it. It wouldn't surprise me if the person who tweeted that out, if it was like a Florida State staffer's burner account that was just trying to have a little fun. And then when realized this was happening, he's like, okay, I cannot have this traced back to me. I've got to get rid of any trace of this. So again, maybe it's a little out of left field, but I think it's a pretty good theory if you ask me.
I could totally see it. That would be a very college football thing to have happen. The most college football thing would be for someone to track him down anyway. And it'd be like, oh, he tried to delete his account, but I used like some IP address finder to figure it out. That would be the most college football thing.
What do you got going on the Fort Wayne Journal Gazette right now?
Yeah, well, it's football season, right? Obviously, so we have a ton of local high school football coverage. I won't be in Bloomington on Friday because of high school football. We focus on that very, very heavily here. So I'll be at a high school game on Friday, and then I'll be at Notre Dame for Notre Dame Northern Illinois on Saturday, the home opener for the Irish, trying to follow up that win over the Aggies with another win and get to 2-0.
Appreciate you as always, and we'll check in with you again probably in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, looking forward to it, John. That should be fun.
Good stuff from Dylan Sinn. Appreciate him. Much like many of our other guests, we will check in with him regularly in a couple of weeks' time. Continue to get his thoughts on each of the teams, the major teams, I should say, throughout the state of Indiana: the Hoosiers, the Boilermakers, and the Fighting Irish. All 3 teams currently off to a good start, and 2 of those teams, Purdue and Notre Dame, will face each other in week 3, as we've now mentioned a few different times. So that'll be a very big game for really both teams. Notre Dame for their playoff aspirations, and Purdue for getting back to the postseason under Ryan Walters, or really for the first time under Ryan Walters, but just back to the postseason for the first time in a couple of years. So thank you, Dylan Sinn. We will chat again in a few weeks and look forward to each of our conversations. One thing I want to get into before we move on from Indiana football, I want to mention some of the players of the week that were given, those awards that were handed out to each player. Carter Smith was given an offensive player, or I guess the offensive player of the week for the FIU game. He is good, very good to have on the offensive line. He is somebody who jumped in the transfer portal initially when Tom Allen left, but Kurt Signetti, and I'm sure Bob Bostad as well, the O-line coach, able to convince him to stay after things kind of settled and the transition was complete, bring in the Cignetti regime here in Bloomington. So great to have Carter Smith on the offensive line, and really all the offensive line in general just did fantastic when you consider what we've been used to seeing in this offensive line being the last couple of years with Indiana. And especially a lot of people were worried after Nick Kidwell went down during fall camp, and to see guys step up and really, I know we'll really see what they're made of when they face Big Ten level competition, but it was just nice to see on Saturday a fairly dominant performance by the offensive line. I know there were some issues here and there when it comes to protecting Curtis Rourke, but we learned that he's fairly mobile. And so if there's breakdowns from time to time, we know Rourke is a seasoned veteran, and he can make that decision on whether or not he'll need to use his legs. So good on the offensive line, and Carter Smith in particular. Defensive player of the week. Who else other than Aiden Fisher? He had, I believe, double-digit tackles. I don't have the stats right in front of me. He had a sack or two, and as we've mentioned time and again, he is going to be the anchor for this defense all season long. And I think we've said this before as well. Indiana hasn't had somebody like that since Micah McFadden, and to have somebody like Aiden Fisher in your on your defensive side of the ball, it couldn't be more important, especially in a first year like this. And hopefully he continues to shine. I'm sure he will, and hopefully other guys, are able to see him as kind of a figure to not to compare themselves to, but they want to reach that level, and it'll hopefully elevate the rest of the defensive unit to step up their game. And not that the defense was disappointing by any stretch of the imagination. Like Curt Cignetti said, the only time the defense really had a bad series against FIU was in the closing drive of the second quarter. Other than that, the defense played a nearly flawless game. And I think we'll expect more of the same as Western Illinois comes to town. And I know I've already mentioned before that, at least I think I have, that this is a team that, again, just like FIU, the game does not need to be in question at any point during this. And it needs to be a game where Taven Jackson is comfortably in the game, filling in for Curtis Rourke about midway through the third quarter. And you really don't want to be giving up. I mean, ideally, you want to have a shutout in a situation like this. I know mistakes happen. You have every once in a while, you may have a busted coverage, and that's for any game. So if you have one mistake, I do think that's something not to get too stressed out about if you're an Indiana fan. But the goal should definitely, for this game in general, to be kind of never in doubt. To get, like I said, just like FIU, this game needs to be over before it begins, if that makes any sense. So moving forward, special teams player of the week, Derek McCormick. I'll be completely honest, I can't think of what position he plays right now. But that's on me. For some reason, I feel like he's Indiana's kickoff man. And again, making myself look completely foolish right now. But that's okay. I believe in transparency, and I do want to confirm. I don't want to just say that and then move on from it. I do want to confirm what I'm talking about, just so we can, because that's exactly what McCormick wants. He needs the John Alden seal of approval from In Touch with Indiana Sports. So yes, Derek McCormick is Indiana's kickoff man, and I know Nicholas Radicic, he was the guy taking field goals for the Hoosiers. So shout out to them. And then scout team player of the week, there's three of them: Jack Greer, Ray Stewart, Clay Connor, the up-and-comers for the Hoosiers, those who may be vying for their own spot on the roster, or in the rotation, I should say, at some point in time or another. Let's go ahead and move on from Indiana football. Been pretty Indiana football heavy so far, but there is a couple of basketball things to be paying attention to, especially on the recruiting side of things, as we move into really the rest of the week. And I think most of this, or some of this, is happening today. And the two biggest names when it comes to recruits that Indiana basketball fans are keeping an eye on, one of them is Trent Sisley, who is now moved on from the state of Indiana for high school and is now at Montverde Academy, which the Hoosiers and Mike Woodson specifically has really created a really good relationship with the guys down there in Montverde in Florida. And then the other name is Braylon Mullins. And one thing that is really important to take note of today, if you're an Indiana basketball fan, is that the entire Indiana basketball staff is set to visit Braylon Mullins today, do an in-house visit. And that's big. That shows that Indiana is kind of putting all their chips on the table, all their cards on the table, however you want to phrase that. I don't know how the correct way to say that is. But Indiana's all in on Mullins. And they're all in on Sisley as well. They're planning on making the trip down to visit Trent Sisley at Montverde later this week. So 2 big important moments for the Indiana basketball, I guess, recruiting cycle, if you will, as Indiana tries to land commitments from both Mullins and Sisley after missing out on Malachi Moreno. And then not to mention you had Jalen Harrelson in town for the Indiana football game this past weekend. And again, I don't think you have to land all 3. Obviously, in a perfect world, if you land all 3 of those guys, that looks really good for your program. But as I've mentioned before, I don't think having a huge number of freshmen is, required to have a successful basketball team this year. Now, I know it's important to get the best of the best if you can when it comes to high school players. And it's even more important in the state of Indiana specifically to land those guys that come from your state, the in-state guys, the Indiana high school guys. And I know both Harrelson and Sisley have moved on from, the local high school scene to do prep school at LaLue and Montverde respectively. Mullins yet to make that move, and I'm assuming at this point he will not. But it's important for Indiana fans. It's just different when it comes to the high school game. And that's one thing. Obviously grew up in Southern Indiana and have lived in Kentucky, the Louisville area. So the Kentuckiana area for my entire life. The night and day difference for high school basketball support. I mean, it's crazy. All you got to do is cross the river, and it's just a major difference in the way that people support high school basketball. And because of that, the importance of keeping those guys in state, and for the IU fans in Bloomington, it can be. We've seen what happened last year when you don't bring in guys and you see all of them going to Purdue. It's going to raise some eyebrows and make people wonder if Mike Woodson is really doing enough and putting forth enough effort to get some of these guys. And one thing we are seeing from Woodson this year that I think we've seen him try harder with than we ever have, it's making a push for these local high school guys. And again, even though some of them aren't necessarily local anymore. And I think that kind of fits more of the mold for Mike Woodson, because Mike Woodson has shown a favorability, I guess, or favoritism, maybe the better way to put it, for the guys that are in these prep school programs. And with him being an NBA guy for several years of his coaching career, that's kind of his calling card. It's always, other than, I believe he's selling the NBA more so than selling Indiana to a lot of these guys. And maybe some Indiana fans probably won't want to hear that. I'm not saying that that's gospel, like that's the way that it is. But one of the best things that Mike Woodson has in his back pocket is to be able to say that he coached in the NBA for X amount of years and had a decent level of success with the Knicks and even with the Hawks as well. And then being able to say now the college game that he's taken, Trace Jackson Davis, Jalen Hood-Schifino, Khalil Ware, and probably a couple of guys that are on this year's roster that will make that jump as well. That's what he's always going to have in his back pocket. And if he's able to field successful teams more so than last year, of course, but do even better than the first 2 years where you simply made the tournament and didn't do a whole lot with it. If you can take that next step and show that you are winning important games, winning different titles, winning the Big Ten, or at the very least competing for the Big Ten, getting to at least that second weekend, that's that next step that Indiana and Mike Woodson need to take. They really want to have that extra piece of juice to add to their pitch whenever they're talking to these guys. And I think it's a good formula for success. But again, it all comes down to what the product on the floor looks like. And we've said the same thing with football. Like we've talked about Julian Lewis and him really considering Indiana. It's going to depend on what things look like ultimately. I mean, yeah, you can have a great relationship with coaches. You can have a pedigree of being in the NBA, NFL, whatever it may be. But these guys want to win while they're in college if they're going to be participating at the highest level of college basketball and college football. And Braylon Mullins, as we've seen over the past several months, he's getting offers from the best of the best now. He's been one of the guys who've probably taken the biggest leap overall when it comes to high school players and their jump from different levels of rankings, whatever it may be. Mullins is definitely up there when it comes to guys who have really upped the ante when it comes to their, I don't want to say their draft stock, but their college stock and the different programs they're beginning to look at. Kentucky now looking at them as well. And I know you've already lost Malachi Moreno to Kentucky. And while that was a loss people didn't want to see, he had the Kentucky ties all along. And when you have Mark Pope at the being the head coach now, former alum, former national champion for the Cats, it was probably going to be really hard to pull him away from that. But here's the thing, though. You can't keep losing guys to Kentucky, especially guys who don't have that same connection that Malachi Moreno would have. If you lose Braylon Mullins to Kentucky, that's, not a good look. And really, again, losing any of these guys to anyone is not good. You want to be able to land as many as you can. But you don't want to keep losing recruiting battles to guys like Mark Pope, who are, even though they are alum of their school and they're very well respected around them by their alum and that type of stuff, other alum, I should say. He still doesn't have hardly any results to really show for it. You're just basing off of potential. And so Mike Woodson should be able to have a leg up when it comes to what he is selling, as opposed to guys like Mark Pope, or even if you're going down south to Louisville with Pat Kelsey, he's selling the same thing. So you want to make sure that you can land these guys while you can, and then build upon that. So you kind of build this recruiting fortress, if you will. So it's a lot harder to penetrate in the future whenever you have guys that are, considering all the different local schools and that type of stuff. So there's your little recruiting update. We'll try and chat with Kyler Staley about this stuff as we move forward into the get closer to basketball season. And as we've said with football back in July, it'll be here before we know it, and we'll have crossover season, and it'll be intense. It'll be fun. We'll have a lot to talk about, a lot to react to. And even Hoosier hysteria, that's already sneaking up on us. It's about a month, 5 or 6 weeks away from now. Right in the middle of football season when Nebraska comes to town. So, and I'm still pinpointing that weekend until proven otherwise, I guess. That could be one of the most exciting weekends in Bloomington that we have this year, depending on if Indiana football continues to win and look good. And I don't want to say 100% be undefeated, but there is that path that we've laid out. If things swing in the Hoosiers' favor, where they could be unbeaten at that point, and Nebraska potentially as well. And if you have that type of environment, that type of game with those types of, stakes, and on top of that, you have Hoosier hysteria going on the same weekend, and the homecoming, all that stuff building on top of each other is a recipe for one of the biggest weekends in Bloomington of the year, of the collegiate athletic calendar. So looking forward to that if we get to that moment and have those types of stakes there. So again, I want to go ahead and get into I want to give an early preview, I guess. And it's a preview, maybe not be the best word, but I want to let you in on some of the early kind of spreads that I'm looking at as things I'm probably going to bet on this week. And I'm not going to go through a bunch. I'm just going to go and name a couple of things, probably 3 or 4 things that I'm looking at. And I've got 2 that I'm really confident in that I think I'm going to parlay together, and then 2 that I may just do separately because I'm less confident. I don't want them to ruin the parlay. And again, any of this can happen, in any way, shape. It could be wrong, right, whatever you want to call it. But I just want to share what I'm kind of looking at when it comes to the betting board this week. And I'll start with this. Number 21, Iowa hosting Iowa State. And Iowa has had Iowa State's number. I believe they've won every game but one in maybe the last 10 years or so. I don't know that fact off the top of my head. But Iowa's hosting the Cyclones. And after we saw what Iowa did last week with their offense and kind of looking different than before, the fact that Iowa is only currently, depending on what sports book you look at, 2.5 to 3 point favorites against Iowa State. I know it's a rivalry, but Iowa has shown Iowa State that they are little brother so often. And the fact that this is in Kinnick Stadium, I just have a feeling this spread is way too small for I guess the expectation for how good Iowa can be, or my perception of how good I think Iowa could be. And Iowa State only beat North Dakota 21-3. And yeah, 21-3 is a good score, but it's FCS North Dakota. And it's not like you beat North Dakota State 21-3. North Dakota State's one of the best programs in FCS football. So, and I believe they struggled in that game before kind of pulling away with it. So I'm going to 100% be taking Iowa to cover that spread. It wouldn't surprise me if Iowa wins this game by double digits. And then the other game I'm really confident in is Tennessee versus NC State. Tennessee is going on the road to NC. That's the one thing that maybe makes me hesitate a little bit, but I'm not buying NC State. They struggled against Western Carolina, and Tennessee absolutely dominated Chattanooga in week 1. It was like 69-3, something along those lines. And Tennessee's currently 8-point favorites against NC State. Again, another spread I just feel like is way too low. And even though it is at home for NC State, I think Tennessee is going to come in and blow the doors off of the Wolfpack. So those are my two big picks for the week when it comes to betting. And if you're somebody who, wants to follow along with those or, bet along with me, I'd bet sooner rather than later, because the spread will continue to move depending on what most people are seeing. Like that Iowa spread's already gone up 0.5 point since I first looked at it yesterday. And again, it doesn't matter a whole lot. I think they're going to blow the doors off of them, like I've been saying, but that's just kind of my thoughts. And then I'll go and throw a couple of other games, Big Ten matchups in particular, that I may throw some money at, just small little bets, just because I think that I'm fairly confident. This is like the first two were my top confidence level. This is like I'm confident, but I also wouldn't be surprised if this ends up not playing out in my favor. And the first one of these is Rutgers minus 22.5 against Akron. Rutgers took care of business against Howard. I believe that game ended up being a push when it comes to the spread. But this one, I know Akron's an FBS team, but Akron, they got the doors blown off by Ohio State. And I know that game was it took Ohio State a little while to get off the ground, but I think Rutgers will be ready for this one. Again, it's just a feeling. Maybe that feeling means absolutely nothing. But in the last game I'm looking at, Nebraska and Colorado. Nebraska 7.5-point favorites. I am not buying the Colorado hype whatsoever. I think last year there's a lot more juice with it just because there was so much more mystery around it. But now we saw what happened. They were 4-8, and it was kind of a joke. And I think Nebraska is taking a step forward this year. And maybe they barely win this game. Like it's at 7.5. But again, I think Nebraska ends up winning this game by 10, 14 points, maybe more. Because again, I don't think Colorado is going to end up being that good when it's all said and done. So those are my early betting picks of the week. And I think that's going to about wrap up today's episode of In Touch with Indiana Sports. So glad to have you here on a Wednesday. Hope you stuck around. Hope you enjoyed yourself. We'll be back again to do it on Friday. Alec Lasley, I believe, is going to join to help us kind of preview the weekend in college football, talk a little more Indiana as they move into week 2 of their opponent with Western Illinois. And I look forward to seeing what they do on the field this Friday as we open up the second chapter in this season, the first season of Kurt Signetti here in Bloomington. So thank you guys for watching. Check out everything going on HoosierIllustrated.com. Football, basketball, all of our guys are doing a great job at getting the content that you look for out each and every day. So check out all that stuff. And again, on YouTube, subscribe, like, comment, share, all that fun stuff. If it pleases you, I'll say. You don't have to do it, but if you want to, I appreciate it. Please, you got to keep the lights on here. Hoosier Illustrated. Till Friday, we'll talk to you next time. This has been an episode of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by Hoosier Illustrated.